Yesterday I did a video concerning the likelihood that 9th District U.S. Representative Doug Collins and his colleagues in the U.S. House might be able to formulate a plan by which to balance the budget and then begin to pay down the national debt. I demonstrated that paying down the national debt is no option because it's mathematically impossible. In the monetary system, which is really a private banking system, that we as Americans are pretty well forced to live under. I would refer you to that video if you have any questions why I might say that. But today I've been asked to kind of go into an area that I referred to in that video, and I asked somewhat rhetorically whether anyone out there had ever really considered the notion that, or asked the question really, why the United States government, the most powerful government in the world's lone superpower, might have to borrow to pay its bills. Just doesn't seem reasonable to have that much power on this earth, yet not have any wherewithal within your own confines to be able to use that power. No, they've got to borrow in order to have to play all that power into position here in the world. And I kind of let the cat out of the bag, explaining that it really doesn't have to be that way. The United States government does not have to borrow or tax what others have borrowed in order to pay its bills. The reason why the United States government does borrow or tax what we have borrowed to pay its bills is because it chose to long before you and I were ever around. That happened in 1913 when the United States government enacted the Federal Reserve Act and entrusted a private corporate consortium to control the issuance of American currency. That is a very powerful position that we put some private bankers into. And ever since then, the United States government has ceased to operate with the sovereignty that you might think a United States government or any government ought to operate with. The reason why we're not sovereign is because we have no wherewithal, or at least we operate that way for all practical purposes, unless we borrow funds that are printed out of the air ever since 1971, officially, by the Federal Reserve. And so because that's the legal tender, then it all has to be borrowed to begin with. So whether we borrow it and then it plays out into the economy, or whether the United States government borrows it, or whether the United States government borrows or taxes what we have borrowed, it's all borrowed funds. And essentially every dollar that is in circulation in our country and in the world is borrowed from a central bank that prints the money out of the air. Now, that central bank is called the Federal Reserve. And what that is the head of a corporate consortium that is within the United States government. Just imagine that. Wrap your mind around a corporate consortium who has its home office within the United States federal government. what I'm describing to you is the essence of a corporate fascist system of government. For corporate fascism, which is essentially a system of government where corporations influence the policies of government to varying extents. The ultimate extents is when fascism is completed, in which time the corporations will dictate policy. Now, how does that happen? It happens, first of all, by the control of the issuance of the currency. Because once the control of the issuance of the currency is in private hands, then private motives enter into the government. Because all of the elected political leaders want to be able to use that money in order to buy their positions in the government. They want to be able to buy votes and stay there long enough to develop long-standing careers. And that's what we see there. So we have the Federal Reserve, which is its operating main office within the United States government, but is not part of the government. It's an independent agency, and it is unaccountable by law to the United States government. It's unaccountable to our Congress. It's unaccountable to the United States, to the president. It's unaccountable to you and me. So how would you like that franchise? How would you like the franchise where you owned the right to print legal tender, loan it out into the economy for the economy to use, but also be unaccountable to what else you might do with it for your own purposes? And that's essentially what we have. So the Federal Reserve has these operating arms. The Federal Reserve's operating arms are corporations. And the corporations have owners. And those owners are private banks. Of 1,700 private banks who own the system, it's estimated that 10 Wall Street banks own 60 to 70% of the capitalization of the entire system. And because they do, and because their representatives are on the board of the Federal Reserve, then also they hold quite a bit of influence on the policies of the Federal Reserve. Now, officially, legally, the Federal Reserve has a dual mandate. The dual mandate is to maximize employment and have a stable value to the currency. Well, how would they go about doing that? Well, see, they can say that they're doing that any way they want to. And unless something changes in the law, the Congress has to accept it. The president accepts it as well. So here it is, we have this corporate consortium that is within the United States government. And I would propose to you that it is that corporate consortium that is dictating the policies, whether our representatives and senators really understand that. And they do that by enabling them to stay in office. And they stay in office by virtue of the fact that they need corporate donations to mount campaigns. So that's the essence of what we have. But it doesn't have to be that way. The United States government could at any time take back the control of the issuance of the currency out of private hands. And the government, the people's government, could be the control the issuance of the currency. If they were to do that, the government could print the same currency out of the air that this private central bank prints out of the air. The difference being, the government wouldn't have to borrow it. You see, what the Federal Reserve System did when they enacted the Federal Reserve Act was it diverted the flow of funds that should have been there to operate the government to Wall Street banks. And you wonder how they got to be too big to fail. Well, friends, that's it. That's how the Wall Street banks got to be too big to fail. And now they're too big to jail, because the influence that they have over the United States government is so ingrained that they even control the Security and Exchange Commission. They control the Justice Department. They control anything and everything that has to do with the United States government. And that's why the United States government doesn't appear to be wanting to do our work for us. No, they're not going to do our work as long as it's being controlled by the bankers. So I thought I would throw that out again today and kind of expand on that one point so that you get a little bit further along the line, further down the rabbit hole of how we got to be where we are right now. And these rabbit holes go so deep, and there's so many geopolitical aspects of this, that once you begin to get a finger on what's really happening with the money, then you also, and how it works, you also begin to understand what's happening in this world geopolitically, and what motivates our president to do the things that he does, initiate the policies that he does, why the Congress initiates the policies that it does, and why it just seems to be that the people never get any meaningful legislation to help them. It's always helping private interests. So I think I'll leave it there for today, and we'll rejoin the discussion someday real soon. All right, thanks.